You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 176. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. How do you feel about your email inbox? If I were to ask you to go check it right now, what comes up for you? Do you feel indifferent? Do you feel anxious? Are you a little bit concerned about what you might find lurking there? If you struggle to keep up with your emails, you are definitely not alone. This is a challenge for a large number of lawyers, and I am thrilled to have you here today because we are going to do a deep dive on how you can gain control over your emails and your inbox. We're going to talk about how to deal with your inbox. I'm going to offer 5 strategies to help you gain control and feel in charge. I'm going to help you carve out time to get your work done so you can stop feeling like you're playing whack-a-mole with your email inbox. Now, this topic is important because so many lawyers struggle with email, and there are a number of reasons for that. There is a high volume of email traffic and a pressure to feel like you need to respond quickly to those emails. You may find that you're trying to do your work and yet you're distracted. You feel a pressure to respond to the emails that are coming in. You feel like you're constantly interrupted, constantly putting out fires. Your practice starts to feel really reactionary. And as a result, you feel out of control, like you're always behind, you're never catching up, and you're busy all day, and yet you're not getting the things done that you want to get done. So, as I mentioned, if you can relate, you are not alone. I know when I was practicing as a lawyer, I had a lot of email traffic to deal with, and at the time I had a fairly unconscious relationship with email. Now that I'm a coach, I have a much more intentional practice. I have learned a number of strategies and tools to better manage email, and I apply those tools in my own coaching practice. And I help lawyers like you to develop tools and to implement tools to help them gain much greater sense of control over their practice and to find ways to deal with that inflow of email traffic. So today, what I'm hoping to do with you is to help you develop some strategies and some tools that will help you to feel like you're much more in control of your practice. These are strategies that are simple, they're easy to implement, and they will have a big shift in terms of how you feel with respect to your email. So strategy number 1 that I'm going to offer to you today is mindset. Now, before I dive into that, I just wanted to offer an analogy that might speak to you. When it comes to people who come to my front door, the door-to-door salesperson, or the person who's here to invite me to sign up for something, I feel quite strongly that it is my private space and that they should not be knocking on my door, especially if I'm in the middle of making dinner. There are several pots on the stove, everything's boiling over. The last thing that I want to do is walk over to the door and awkwardly have a conversation with somebody about how I don't have time to talk to them because I'm busy making dinner. Now, when you think about it in terms of your physical home, you can see that there are boundaries there. You can see how it's your private and personal space. It may be less easy to see that when you think about your email because we have different connotations with email. We may have a different relationship with email. So if you think about how you consider your email, you may associate it with that sense of urgency, with that sense of responsiveness. And so when it comes to mindset, the first thing that I'd invite you to think about is to treat your email inbox a little bit like your front door, where you have more discretion, more autonomy, more control over who you choose to let into your email inbox. Now, I recognize that you may have an employer and that your inbox is kind of a joint inbox, right? That it's their name on the email address, their name on that inbox. And so the rules that we set for the way that we deal with our emails are not always set unilaterally by us. However, and I'll get to that in this podcast episode, the idea here that I'd love for you to take away is that you are in control of your email. You get to set the rules with some exceptions, and that it's this taking charge that is part of the mindset shift that I'm inviting you to make around your emails. Now, in addition to just that kind of broader concept of how you think about your email, I would invite you to be really intentional about the language that you use around your email. Now, you may have heard me say this on the podcast before, but the way that you think influences the way you feel, which in turn influences your actions. So here, I'd love for you to be really conscious and aware of the language that you're choosing to describe your email, to describe your inbox. So for example, if you're telling yourself that your inbox is out of control, that it has caught on fire, if you tell yourself that you're in reaction mode, that creates a feeling of being panicked, of being out of control, of being reactionary. And as a result, when it comes to the actions that you're taking, the way that you respond to your emails, it might be more ad hoc. You might be in a rush. You might feel that sense of urgency and act a little bit hasty. You don't plan things out strategically or efficiently. And all of that stems from the way that you're describing your emails. So here, what I invite you to do is think of other ways that you can describe your email. So for example, you might tell yourself that you are in charge. I get to decide when I respond to my email. And that will create a different feeling, one of calm, one of confidence. And as a result, the action that you take will be more measured, will be more efficient, will be planned out and thought through. So what I'm inviting you to do here is to shift your mindset in terms of the way you're thinking about email to one where you take control of the narrative. Choose to tell yourself an intentional story. You are in control of your inbox. You get to decide when to check your email and when to respond. You get to decide what is urgent and what can wait. You will respond when you are ready. Other areas where you might alter the language that you're using. If you find you're telling yourself that you are reacting to your email, choose responding, right? It's a little bit less charged as a word. If you're telling yourself you are a slave to your email, a slave to your phone, you might tell yourself, I am monitoring my email. I am monitoring my phone. If you're telling yourself, I'm barely keeping up, I've barely got my head above water, instead you might say, I am managing my email. Instead of I'm all over the place, maybe you're telling yourself that you are measured. Instead of I have a mountain of email, I have thousands of emails to respond to, you might tell yourself that you have a relatively large volume of emails to respond to that day. Better yet, be specific. You have 12 emails that you need to respond to by the end of the day. And what this does is when you are intentional about the way that you think about your inbox, the way that you feel, the way that you speak about it, you will no longer feel like you're at the mercy of your inbox. You will start to see how it is there to serve you, not the other way around. And this will result in a fairly instant shift in your energy. So once you've mastered your mindset, or at least chosen to be more intentional about the way that you feel and think about your email, I'm going to invite you to think about the overall structure of your time management systems. So you may have heard the expression that how you do one thing is how you do everything. So if your email feels out of control, chances are there are other areas of your practice and possibly your personal life where you feel the same way. So what we want to do is make sure that you've got structures and scaffolding in place to organize your time and your practice so that your email is a part of that overall picture instead of being the main driver of how you run your day. So you might ask yourself the question of whether you're starting your day without a plan and looking at your email to tell you what to do, or if you're showing up with your plan already made and fitting in your emails and the perhaps deadlines that come in through your emails to the plan you've already created for yourself. And there is a big difference there. So what I'd invite you to be thinking about is how you are planning. I recommend lots of strategies around planning, but particularly planning your weeks, planning your days, and the way that you schedule your days. I would love for you to be planning and scheduling your days the night before, in the morning, revisiting that plan, revisiting that schedule, doing that perhaps in conjunction with what you find in your inbox in the morning. But the idea here is that you are very intentional about it. And if you need strategies or suggestions about how to better manage your practice, I've got more than 24 podcast episodes about time management for lawyers. I've got a roadmap that you can download that will take you through an inventory of those episodes. There are descriptions of those episodes. There are suggestions about how you can approach them. And so I'd invite you to do that and start building up systems and scaffolding to support you in your practice so that your email is now a complement. It's a part of that structure instead of the driving force. Now, when it comes to your structure, what I would also love for you to think about is what percentage of your time you are going to allocate to dealing with email. Now, I think sometimes email gets lost, right? The idea that we're going to deal with email isn't something that we account for in our day. And that means that you are either not doing it or you're missing out on other things. You're not doing other work because you're doing your email. Now, I recently was working with a client who wanted to do something in addition to her practice. She wanted to make a change in her practice that would require a certain amount of time and effort. And so I asked her how much of her day, how much of her time she was willing to allocate to that project on a scale of 0% to 100%. And her response was really great. She said, well, actually, I don't want to change anything. I just want to do it on top of that 100%. This is how we all feel. We don't want to sacrifice or change anything that we're doing. We just want that extra time to appear. But if we adopt that strategy, then either that thing will not get done because it's outside of our 100%, or we will do it anyways, but we're going to skip out on something else. So here, what I'd invite you to do is to be realistic and to be intentional. Whether it's 10%, 20%, whatever percent of your day, we're going to start dedicating actual time to your email so that you've accounted for it. You're able to deal with it without missing out on the other things that you would like to get done during your workday. So step 1, mindset. Step 2, overall structure of your practice. Step 3, this is where you're going to need to learn how to achieve a balance between meeting your client needs in a way that is responsive and setting up boundaries to protect your workday. So this really boils down to responsiveness versus focus time. So I would invite you to make some rules about this, right? If you are dealing with your emails ad hoc, deciding in the moment which ones get a response and which ones don't, it's going to be really exhausting on your decision-making, executive functioning skills. So instead, let's make some rules ahead of time, and then we can implement those rules as you go throughout your day, as you're running your emails against the filter of your rules. So your rules are going to be specific to you, to your practice, your clients, your employer, and the flow of your workday. Now, what are some considerations for when you go to make those rules? Number 1, what is the response time that you are going to set for emails that come through? Now, some firms will require or request that you respond to every email within a 2-hour time frame. So you might need to find a way to manage that 2-hour window. If you are self-employed or you don't have that rule, then you might decide what response time would make the most sense in your practice, right? Is it, I will respond to every email within 24 hours or 48 hours? What is appropriate for you? You want to set that rule. You probably also want to set a schedule in terms of when you're going to deal with your emails. So if, for example, you've got a 2-hour response time window, you'll need to build in a check time every 2 hours into your practice to make sure that you can fall on side of that. So for example, you might be checking your email at 8 a.m., 10 a.m., noon, and 2, 4, and 6 p.m., right? So every 2 hours, you're checking your email. Now, I check my email relatively frequently throughout the day. I don't have it as a superset 2-hour window, but I typically check my email between tasks. I'm also very comfortable finishing a task and then checking my email. So I've got a certain rhythm that I've developed for myself. If you're just starting out, you may need to be a little bit more structured and have those windows be scheduled in 2-hour blocks or whatever works best for you. Now, In addition to checking your email or planning times where you will check your email, you also want to decide when you will respond to emails. So as a general rule, I will respond to emails at the end of the day. Now, this might be something that works for you. Your practice might support that. Maybe you deal with the urgent emails if you need to, but then there's a block of time in the afternoon or at the end of the day where you respond. So you'll want to allocate time to actually responding to emails. Now, you may have heard the rule that if an email takes less than 2 minutes, you should respond in the moment. That might work for you. I personally don't like that rule. I will sometimes, but not very often, respond to an email the minute it comes in. The reason I don't like to do that is because if I have 5 2-minute emails to respond to, then I very quickly lose 10 minutes at least dealing with those emails. Usually they take a little bit more than 2 minutes. And so if I've had something that I wanted to get done, I've now lost a big chunk of time that I could have spent doing the task that I chose to do, not the task that came in through my email that day. And the other thing here is if you do choose to do something like this, right, where you're reviewing your emails and you're going to respond to them later, whether it's later that day or later in the week, you want to find a way to track your emails so that you don't lose them. Now, I have a very simple and scientific method, which is I write things down. I have a pad of paper. I take notes during the day of things that come in. Some of those things are emails. Others might be tasks or things that I remember that I need to do, etc. I like to record all of it so I don't lose it. Others like to flag emails. You might have a special way of highlighting them. Some people have whatever system it is. So do what works for you. But the idea is you want to have a way to track your emails so that you have a way of knowing where they are when it comes time to respond. Now, like all rules, we like to have some flexibility. So what are some exceptions that you might want to carve out? A couple that come to mind here, urgency, right? If you go and you check your inbox in the morning and you realize that there is something that is truly urgent, chances are you may need to deal with that. You might need to respond to that email, even if it wasn't what you had scheduled for yourself. Now, if you've got a schedule in place, then you'll be able to see how you can reallocate the things, the tasks on your list, but you may choose to do that. You're going to make an exception to your plan by responding to this thing because it's urgent. Maybe it's a filing day. Maybe it's an emergency that came up with a client. You get to decide. And then finally, you're going to want to adhere to your schedule. So the fallback rule is that you're going to adhere to the schedule that you have for yourself. You're going to follow these rules that you've set yourself around emails. Now, what will result if you've got this plan in place, these rules in place? You've now got rules about when you're going to respond. You've got rules about times to check your email. You've got rules about when generally you're going to actually write those emails. You'll have a more regular routine. And what you'll find is, let's say you're checking every 2 hours. You've now got 2-hour pockets where you can do your billable work, your focus work, schedule your meetings, etc. And what you'll want to do is think about where you're putting your focus time. Now, I mention this in particular because a lot of lawyers struggle with this, especially if you are a lawyer who does a lot of drafting and heavy thinking, and you need that space where you're just focused, right? You're thinking about that one thing, you're putting the pieces together. It can be really complicated. Interruptions can really throw you off. So you want to be strategic in terms of where you put your focus time. So focus time should go between those email checks. If you receive a lot of email traffic at a particular time of day and you know you need to be responsive at that time, don't make that your focus time. Pick another time. What I find is that early mornings are often really good, or later in the day when the usual workday has kind of wrapped up or has not yet begun. And sometimes you want to put that on weekends, right? Maybe there's an expectation that you're not checking your email on the weekends. And so that might be where you start scheduling some of your focus time if you truly can't get it in during the week. So just to recap, we've talked about step 1, which is mindset. Step 2, which is having an overall structure in place for your practice. Step 3 is achieving the balance between being responsive and creating boundaries for your work. Step 4 is creating a process for yourself to respond to your incoming emails. And this is really how you deal with emails, how you process and prioritize your emails. So I think you'll want to think about the system that you have for checking and responding to emails. Now, just taking a step back, looking at this from a high level, you may have heard of different philosophies. There's this inbox zero philosophy where you basically have an empty inbox that once you deal with an email, you either delete it or you file it somewhere. So you've always got this empty inbox at the end of the day. I love that in theory. I do not adhere to that. I'm probably a 10% inbox zero or inbox 10% because I find there's always stragglers. And to me, there's diminishing returns. The time cost of getting it down to zero is just too much. So there are things that I let sit in my inbox, but I do try to clear a lot of my email out of the inbox by responding and then filing or deleting. Some people don't file their inbox at all. They respond, but they leave it in their inbox and then they search when they need emails. Personally, I don't like that for my work email. I'm okay with that for my personal email, but my work email, I like to have a little bit more organized. For me, there's a question of, do you respond to your emails from top to bottom? So most recent to older emails or the other way around? Obviously, if you start other way around, then it's good. People who come in first are first served, but sometimes you might take the approach that it's easier to go top to bottom. So these are just different ways of approaching your email, and there is no one single right way. You get to decide what's going to work best for you. So I'm going to share a little bit about how I process my email. And as I do that, I'd like you to think about your email. So first of all, I actually have multiple email addresses. I've got 4 email addresses right now, plus LinkedIn, plus my phone. So text messages and phone calls. Of my emails, 2 of them are work emails. One of them is for my coaching practice. One is for contract work that I do separately. And I've got a personal email. So that is where all my school emails come in for my kids. That's where I've got emails that are with my family about planning family events. And then I've got one email address that is dedicated exclusively to subscriptions, email lists that I sign up for, and a lot of my coaching signups. So it's more of a fun email. It's, I don't want all those emails coming into my work email. It would get way too overwhelming. And what this allows me to do is have separate categories. So if I know I need to check on something for my kids' school, I go to one email address. If I'm at my work email address, it's pretty lean. It's mostly just work. If I'm in my fun email where I'm looking at new coaching tools, practices, coaches who I'm following, whatever, that belongs in a different email. So that just helps me segregate things in my mind so that, again, when I'm going to check my email, I know where I am going. Now, I also don't like to have email notifications. As you can imagine, if I don't like people knocking on my door when I'm making dinner, I also don't like being pinged or dinged when I'm in the middle of trying to write something or think about something. So you can decide whether or not notifications are required in your practice, but if you can turn them off, I would invite you to turn them off because they can be really distracting. Now, I like to check my email periodically throughout the day. I mentioned that a few moments ago, and it probably does work out to be once every 1 to 2 hours, depending on the nature of what I'm doing that day. If I've got a big block of time where I'm focused on a big task, then I may not check my email during that window. Other times I might be checking it more frequently. It really depends, but I have a pace that works for me. I do plan my days the night before and the morning of. So when I check my email in the morning, it's really as an FYI. Is there something on that email that I'd like to add to my list for that day or not? And then when I respond to emails, what I do is I make a list. Sometimes it's really easy for me to get through that list. I don't have to think about the list very much. I just go in order. Other times when I have more emails, then I'll probably need to organize them. And I base that on urgency. So does something need a response right away? Is it really important to me to get it done? Sometimes importance is there's somebody on the other side of that email that I want to know that I'm thinking about them. So I prioritize that email. I think about how long it's going to take me to draft the email response. And sometimes it's how stale is that email. So if I end up with an email and I don't respond day 1, day 2, day 3, and it keeps showing up on my to-do list, then it's become a stale email. I'll need to prioritize it, even though I don't want to. And I'll also want to think about why I have been putting that thing off. Sometimes it's dread. Sometimes it's that the email just isn't urgent. Maybe it's really complicated and I don't know how I want to approach it. Maybe I just don't want to do it. Maybe it came in at an odd time of day or a period when I was really busy and I've just kind of lost sight of it. So these are ways that I sort my email. You'll want to think about how you sort your email. Now, once I respond, I usually cross it off my list. So that's really satisfying. I keep track of what I do every day. So sometimes I'll even write it down on my keeping track list. That again makes me feel satisfied that I've done something. And then with my work email, I will then file it. I keep files for my clients and I will file the email away so that I know where to find it if I need it later. Now, all of this planning, as you can expect, does take time, right? There is a cost to my day of the time that it takes for me to plan, including for those short emails, right? You might say, well, Paula, you've got an email there. You could respond to it in 30 seconds. And instead you've written it down and you've written it down. And that probably takes as much time as you could have taken to respond to the email. Now, that may be true, but here's why I do it is that I like to batch my responses. I like to do them all at once at a time that feels good to me, or periodically throughout the day at a time that feels good to me. And so that's why I do it. And yes, maybe for some emails, I lose out for that particular email, but overall, what I gain is control over my schedule and I preserve my blocks of thinking time because I'm not spending my 2 minutes here, my 2 minutes there. Now, I find it helps me to schedule strategically. I generally don't lose things. Every once in a while, something will slip through. I think that's to be expected. So far, it's nothing that could not be fixed. It gives me time to think and plan strategically about how I respond to my emails. I get to see what types of emails are becoming stale. Is that a signal to me that I maybe need to do something? And I generally feel in control. So here I'd invite you to ask yourself how you want to manage your inbox. So what practice feels good for you? What feels comfortable for you? What works best based on your clients and the way that your practice works, and what aligns with your employer's expectations, right? If you've got an employer and there are certain rules, how can you organize the way that you process emails in a way that aligns with what they need from you? So the fifth strategy is nothing to do with your inbox or how you file your emails. It's emotional regulation. So humans, as I mentioned earlier in the first part, right, where we're talking about mindset, the way that you think affects the way that you feel, which affects the actions that you take. So emotions are driving a number of the actions that you are taking or not taking, whether or not we want to talk about emotions. And sometimes when I think about practicing law, I feel like emotions are not really part of that equation. We're much more concerned about the numbers and the data, the facts, the logic, but we are humans who are very much driven by the way that we think and feel. So if you are, for example, driven by people pleasing, right? If you want everybody around you to be happy and you've got emails in your inbox and it's driving you crazy that you haven't responded yet, that might be really distracting for you. And so you're responding to emails in the moment and you're doing so at the cost of the work that you have on your plate. So you're overriding your priorities in order to make other people happy. Maybe you feel dread, right? It's that email that comes in from opposing counsel or a prickly person that you may be working with. And when you see that email, you procrastinate, you avoid it. And by avoiding that email, you create urgency in the long term. You might feel anxious about your email, right? You might feel that sense of agitation, like you're behind, that things are out of control. And so you feel stressed and that causes you to stall out, maybe freeze a little bit. You might avoid things. You might take longer than you need to get things done. You might feel a great deal of shame over your email or lack of responsiveness. And that can have an impact on how you deal with your emails. And finally, you might feel a sense of overwhelm, right? There's just so much there. You don't know where to start. You feel frozen. You don't do anything because you feel like you don't even know where to begin. So the strategy here is simply to notice that when you look at your emails, that you may have an emotional response and to start to get really familiar with that emotional response and then to learn how to manage your emotions so that you're not letting them derail your plan for the day unless there's a really good reason to do that. So, for example, we don't want you to let people pleasing get in the way of you and the plan that you have for your day. Another way this might show up is you might have a really tedious drafting task that you're dreading, and you go to your email inbox and you see there's a bunch of low-hanging fruit, some emails you could respond to and feel really productive. We don't want you to let that feeling of wanting that instant gratification to get in the way of how you're dealing with your more complicated, complex, perhaps more tedious work. we want you to go back then to your list of exceptions, right? If you're thinking about, okay, how do I want to manage my emotions around my emails? Go back to that list, right? The exceptions that you created for yourself. And so you might find that you're responding really quickly to something because of that people pleasing, but that might not be one of your categories, right? If your categories are urgency and importance, you need to ask yourself whether that email truly warrants an immediate response, or if it's just something you're doing so that you can feel better. And we really want you to develop that sense of what is truly urgent and what can wait. And the more that you do that, the more in control you're going to feel. Now, once again, I'm going to invite you to think about your language. I'm going to invite you to think about the narrative that you have with yourself. Of course, I feel overwhelmed. I have a lot to do today, and I will get it done, one step at a time. I have a system in place. Nothing is urgent here, right? You are in control of your inbox. So to recap, I have offered 5 strategies to help you to feel more in control of your email. Number 1, mindset. So you get to control your inbox, not the other way around. Number 2 is the overall structure of your practice management. So you get to decide what's going to happen in your day. You set the schedule, and your email and what comes in through your email is simply a part of that. It's not running the show. Number 3 is balance. So you're wanting to find the right balance between being responsive and setting boundaries around your workday. And you're going to set some general rules for yourself so that it's easier for you to make decisions about which emails to address and when based on those rules. Number 4, you're going to have a process for responding to emails. So when you actually do sit down to write your emails, how do you keep track of them? How do you deal with them? How do you prioritize them? What do you do when those emails have been written and sent? And then finally, emotional regulation, right? When you go to implement these strategies and then the email shows up in your inbox and you feel that sense of panic, you feel that sense of needing to respond right away, how are you going to walk yourself through that so that you are perhaps responding to those truly urgent emails, but you're not responding to everything in an ad hoc way that doesn't serve your overall goals? Now, if you are just starting out and this is a fresh idea for you, this is really raising your awareness, your intentionality behind your email and the way that you manage it, this is a lot to take in. And what I'd encourage you to do is to simply identify one thing, one takeaway, whether that be mindset or developing some rules for yourself, or even just getting a better handle on the way that you feel in response to your emails as they come in through the inbox. And so take that one strategy and apply that, and then you can move forward and apply more strategies. And if you're more seasoned and maybe you've already raised your level of awareness around your email, and this is a little bit more of a tweaking, again, I'd invite you to think about which area in your practice would have the greatest return if you were to make a few tweaks. So for example, maybe it is that mindset piece, right? Maybe you've made a lot of changes in the way that you process email, but you haven't really taken that step back to think about you as the master of your email, you being in control, and a mindset shift, an adjustment in the way that you speak about your email, the way that you speak to yourself about your email could have a really significant impact on your stress levels and how confident you feel when it comes to managing your inbox. So that, my friend, is what I have to share with you today. Thank you so much for joining me. I feel like email and email traffic and dealing with interruptions and managing your inbox is something that comes up so often with lawyers. And so I'm thrilled that you're here. I'm thrilled that you're taking an interest in some of the steps that you can take to feel more in control. As I mentioned, I do have a free download. It is a roadmap of all the podcast episodes that I've recorded about time management. So if that's something that you would like to reach out and consult with, then we will have the link to that roadmap along with the show notes for this podcast episode. If you can't find it, just send me a note. I'll be able to send that to you. And I just wanted to thank you for joining me here today and for joining this podcast. I hope that you have wonderful takeaways that you can apply in your practice. If you work with other lawyers and you think they might benefit from hearing this podcast episode, please do send it over to them. And finally, if you would like some help, some one-to-one support on better managing your practice, on dealing with the emails that are coming in, on designing a protocol so that you can deal with your emails more effectively, by all means, please do feel free to reach out to me. I would love to hear from you. So with that, I'm going to wish you a wonderful week and look forward to reconnecting again soon. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.